Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure being with all of you. And Deo, I think you were completely right with what you said, so not much to expand upon. Sandbox is really all about bringing together the most exciting young innovators. And what we've done over the last years was trying to understand what are the patterns, what are the trends emerging from these young people who are pushing the boundaries in different fields, and especially what we can learn from that for society at large. So when we look at four of these boundary-pushing individuals, four of them are here. Sebastian Lindström is the founder of the Woodstock Youth Along Foundation. They traveled 19 countries in Africa, lived with the local NGOs on the ground, connected their leaders to each other, and documented them, filmed them, tried to get an awareness of what goes on the ground, and then showcased that around the world to increase awareness about the real issues on the ground. Robin Scott is a fantastic social entrepreneur in London. She built up a social enterprise which is connecting the shakers, so those people who made it and now have money and resources, and those people who want to shake but who might not have the connections they need to actually make it happen, and then brings them together so that magic happens. And then we have Eva from Holsti. You might have come across the Holsti Manifesto, which is I will expand upon that later, but it's basically a call for action to live your passion and live your life as you would like to live it versus as you believe society wants you to live it. It's a very powerful statement, and what they basically did was making eco-fashion fashionable, and especially trying to understand how you get that out of the alternative corner into the mainstream. So a very powerful enterprise in New York City, and this is Jury Maxwell in New York as well, who builds Design for America, so young designers who come together to change the world. And what's interesting about all these four is that they're in completely different industries, they're in completely different fields, they do completely different things, some of them more profit-orientated than others, but what brings them all, or what we believe is kind of a common pattern with all of them, is that they are part of what we call Generation Y, question mark. So it's not an age group, it's not the Generation Y age group from 20 to 30 or something, but it's a mindset. It's the mindset of people who question things, people who want to put meaning to what they do, and people who try to understand how we can get around the real challenges we face with the day-to-day activities versus just in the evenings working on a small NGO or something else. So how can we bring meaning to what we're doing? And what's interesting is when we looked at how organizations work nowadays, they're still either or in two categories. The one is the for-profit orientated organizations. So they're focusing on making a profit. So they somehow consider the social impacts via CSR initiatives or other means, but it's not really credible and it's not really effective so far. So what's happening there is when you have fantastic young people going into these organizations, they go there for professional development, maybe for personal development, but most often they're not definitely for meaning. And then you have the other extreme, which is the more socially orientated organization, which is focusing on social impacts, which should be there theoretically. It will come back, I'm sure. It's the other part, which is basically, you can imagine the slide we saw before, exactly, it's back, basically which is focusing more on the social impact, but which is then neglecting the profit side, and which is usually not sustainable and which is usually not scaling. So the key question there being, people usually go into there for meaning, but they usually a lot of times lose out when it comes to professional development, when it comes to personal development. So basically the interesting thing is when you look at these organizations nowadays, how they are structured, they're still very much based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which was drawn up upon around 6 years ago probably by Maslow, who said, we have a certain progression of needs as human beings. We start with material needs, then we have safety needs, emotional needs, esteem needs, and we have a linear progression of these needs after and after we go through them. And this is exactly how people like Bill Gates function. They first set up Microsoft, and then they do a foundation. So they first do well, then they do good. It's a very linear thinking, and we believe this is not true for Generation Y. What's true for Generation Y, we believe, is that we have a lateral cycle of needs. It's an enlightened circle of needs where we want to fulfill these needs at the same time, not after and after. And also we see that it is relational. So with the knowledge economy, with the need to co-create, with the need to collaborate, we depend a lot on the circle of others who then give meanings to what we are doing. So it is in our deepest self-interest to be not too self-interested. So what we see here is being lateral and being relational coming into play. And the exciting thing about technology then is that technology not only accelerates our actions, technology not only enables us to articulate our needs, but technology is also a great means to hold people accountable. So what this person here is doing, he's Googling himself, and he will probably find quite a few traces about himself. And what's interesting is that I believe a lot of people still don't realize that much, how much it means to leave these digital traces now, in terms of how they're accountable to others over the time, who will research them, who will look into what they are doing. And again, it is very much about being more self-concerned in a positive way about our actions and how that has a meaning for what we will do in the future. So what is interesting is that David Stark at Columbia University worked a lot around networked structures. So networked structures emerging now in terms of the uncertainties we face and the question of how can we become innovative, how can we tackle all these environmental challenges, and how can we move away from hierarchies to more network structures, which are usually faster to respond to challenges. And what he established is what comes with this idea of accountability is the governance mechanism of lateral accountability. So basically building peer-to-peer structures where people observe themselves on a peer-to-peer level rather than being observed in a hierarchy. And we will come to that in a second, why we believe this is a very powerful mechanism to hold people accountable and to basically bring accountability from the organizational level to the individual level. What we see here is our community manager, Brad Fitcher, in the middle of a networked structure. Networked structure meaning he's embedded into our organization, but also embedded into a lot of other organizations where he's working on projects, where he's working on different activities. And the point being that whatever he does with these activities, it is very visible also to a lot of other organizations. So he's accountable very much to his peers as much as to people above and below. And what we believe what comes with these arising of network structures, with the new articulation of needs, with all these emotional uncertainties we have at the moment, like from Occupy Wall Street to others, so a lot of economical and societal pressures, we believe what we will need is new organizational vehicles, which we labeled impact organizations. So impact organizations try to balance these two goals we just talked about on the same strategic level. So financial and social on the same strategic level, neither impact first like in social enterprises or financial impact first like in for-profit enterprises. And our definition of an impact enterprise is an impact organization creates social and financial impact via a process of co-creation. It is governed by a logic of lateral accountability, so peer-to-peer observation, and by that reconciles the inherent tension between social and financial aims. Because we believe that in a hierarchy, you will never have a real accountability because you can usually outsource responsibilities and accountabilities, whereas in a peer-to-peer visible structure, you have to cope with these challenges on the individual level and can more easily solve these. So these are the 5 areas where we identified people can build impact organizations and what they can work on after and after. This is basically an impact mission, enlightened leadership, genuine values, lateral accountability, and KPIs. So these are the 5 pillars of an organization which can balance financial and social needs at the same level. Starting with the impact mission. So this is the impact mission of our organization, for example, which is about accelerating young leaders and help them have a global impact before they turn 30. So it's a mission which is both inward focused as well as outward focused. So it focuses on both you, but also the mission on how to improve the world, and therefore becomes credible. And how you can create that is via several ways. One is to cooperate or co-create this mission with your stakeholders. So basically taking into account the stakeholder ecosystems and co-creating the mission with them. Also on a project level, so not only on the organization level, where it's usually quite tough, but also on a project team level. And then, very interestingly, like when you hire people, Zappos is a great example of hiring people, but then telling them that they pay them off if they feel they should leave. So basically, they give you money to leave in order to only have those people who strongly believe that they should be part of the team, and not for monetary reasons, but for the reasons of an amazing company they work for. Which also comes with the question of integrity. What you need for that, though, in order to incredibly credible transform that message is enlightened leadership. This is the CEO of Cisco, John Chambers. He was one of the first CEOs of a for-profit company who realized that, in his own words, you need a mission to change the world in order to sustain businesses in the next 20 to 30 years. 4 reasons of innovativeness, 4 reasons of credibility, and others. And how you create these leadership structures is that, on the one hand side, a lot of companies started building leadership teams which are accountable to each other, so co-CEOs or strong management teams, which are, in a way, democratizing the way leadership works. Not in terms of that everyone needs to decide or everyone is included in decision-making processes, but in terms of that it is similar accountability for the CEO as well as for others. So that basically everyone sees transparently what the CEO is doing as well as what the others are doing in that. So that comes also to the question of how you can actually embody the key values in processes, not only in personalities. And what actually comes with that, a very important aspect, and the key dimension actually is the question of values. The question of, I guess when we go to company homepages nowadays and we see all these fancy values and we are all great and we are all credible and incredibly cool in what we're doing, nobody really believes that. Why? Because there's no real meaning to it, right? It's just written down. This is the example of Holsti. When you go to the homepage of Holsti, on the About Us page, you basically see this manifesto. And this manifesto is basically saying that this is your life and that you should rather join an organization which depicts your passion versus the other way around, an organization that restrains it, seeing organizations as vehicles for yourself versus the other way around. And the powerful thing of these manifestos then is that they potentially create a great community around the organization, but also a lot of legitimacy and credibility for itself. And there's similar other means which come to the value point in terms of writing pledges or also making values tangible, where We Run the World do a great job in doing that. And what's then important when you have these 3 core pillars is how do you actually manage these via governance structure? So what is the key mechanism that rules the organization? And we believe that instead of hierarchy, hierarchy will complement it, will be complemented by lateral accountability. So basically, peer-to-peer observation. How can you create that? Well, you can, on the one hand side, democratize your processes via having more transparent knowledge management systems, more transparent key performance systems, which are visible to all employees, not only to the top management team. You could also co-create products and services much more from the beginning versus only later stages. And also technology. Social media is a great way to actually leverage things like co-tweet or Twitter leaderboards so that actually people see who tweets what. You have informal rankings of people, how they tweet, what they tweet, so that in the end, ideally, not the supervisor tells the person what should be tweeted and what not, but the colleagues directly regulate themselves because they are as accountable for the actions as the person itself. So it's a very powerful way to hold people accountable and to make them a self-managed ecosystem. So what's interesting then is when we come to the question, how can you actually measure that? Because that was all relatively qualitative so far, and the question is how can you actually break that down into key numbers, and how can you make that credible in terms of key performance measures, and how can we, especially in the key performance measures, relate that to these needs we identify which we want to fulfill at the same time. So ideally, the key performance indicators directly depict our needs on the measurement level. And some social enterprises in India are pretty good in that. Aravind Eye Care, for example, is very good in designing non-financial measures. So the question of which output you deliver, not only on the financial side, but also in terms of how many people you serve effectively and other questions. So basically that you have both financial and social indicators, but again on the same level rather than only as a nice to have factor. And also what Google and others have done pretty well, creating the space for people to develop their own projects within this organizational frame so that people really focus on their work because they feel so passionate about that they want to put in 100% and more. And also the question of a lot of organizations becoming really flexible and hands-on with the question of location. What we've seen in London a lot, for example, where a new hub was just opened. You have some major corporations even sending their employees to work from these co-working spaces just to get inspired, just to be around other people from time to time and to open up the box from time to time. So that's definitely something where you can, when you relate that to incentives and key performance indicators, and when you think about how you can bring the right platforms from where you work into the equation, that becomes incredibly powerful. So that leads us actually to the question, well, that might be nice for startups, that might be nice when you create an organization, but can that actually work beyond startups? Can that work for big organizations? And our answer is yes, definitely. And the reason being that the impact organization, as you saw it, is basically the kind of end vision, the end goal. But as an organization, you work on these different areas. You work a bit on the vision, you work on the values, you work on the key KPIs, and then you after progress towards being more impact focused. And what that means is that you can much easier go to people like Bill Gates and say, well, Bill, we know that you probably would never make Microsoft a social enterprise. That wouldn't make sense for what you're doing. But maybe you want to make it an impact enterprise because we believe, in the end, especially for people who think more in productivity terms, we believe it is not only increasing innovativeness and employee motivation, but also especially responsiveness and flexibility. So especially in uncertain times, when you have these lateral accountability structures, network structures, you will become much more competitive in what they're doing. So as a closing point on that, what we believe is that it's not only on the organization level. I mean, organizations are just vehicles for us and vehicles for society to produce, but also to embody our needs. So what we believe is that if we push through these new modes of organizations, we can create an enlightened, self-interested model of capitalism. So the idea being, this is a very simplified model, but the idea being that individuals and businesses give to society. Society then has a positive incentive to not regulate them, but rather to also decrease taxes, to also decrease the level of regulation. And then you develop this virtuous circle of needs or the virtuous circle of capitalism, where you don't have to have an either-or question, but rather a self-fulfilling virtuous circle. And actually closing with a landsman of mine who said that already probably a few hundred years ago, in other words, and I'm probably completely abusing his words, but what he was saying was Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. He was sitting at the river in Heidelberg, and he was saying, if we take man as he is, we make him worse. But if we take man as what he should be, we make him capable of becoming what he can be. And we believe this is very true. If you give people the right vehicles to be themselves, we can create the organizations and the societies we want to have in this world. Thank you very much.